what has the potential to be, I think, a very, very important First Amendment case called United States versus Stevens. Stevens was a successful challenge below to a federal law that makes it a crime to depict animal cruelty or to send pictures of animal cruelty through interstate commerce. There is no issue in the case about the government's right to prohibit animal cruelty. It's just a case about photos, about the breadth of the definition of animal cruelty, and about the scope of what this statute may cover. The lower court in this case held, I think properly, that this was an exceedingly broad statute that could not meet First Amendment standards, and therefore struck it down. But again, to me, almost more interesting than the case itself is the brief that the Solicitor General submitted in the case. It is a very, very broad and in some ways troubling view of the government's ability to regulate speech. And there are two propositions in the Solicitor General's brief in particular that I think would be quite troubling if they were to be adopted by the court. The government argues that this speech ought to be excluded entirely from First Amendment protection. And it reaches that conclusion by saying that deciding whether speech is inside or outside the First Amendment requires, and I'm quoting, a categorical balancing of the value of the speech against its societal costs, allowing the government or the courts to make a priori decisions about the value of speech and then assign First Amendment protection or not, depending upon whether the government finds a speech as valuable, I think is an approach that is very hostile and inconsistent to traditional First Amendment values. The other thing that the government says in its brief and argued below unsuccessfully is that the statute is saved because it has an exception for depictions that have serious value. Outside of the obscenity context, we have never allowed First Amendment protection to depend upon a court or a legislature's assessment of what speech has serious value and what speech does not. We leave that judgment to the marketplace of ideas in our First Amendment system. And so even though it involves a somewhat obscure federal statute, it has now called into question very large principles under the First Amendment.